Mm. Hey, Marilyn's here. I'll wait a few minutes before I get started.
Swap. Odierbar. Pająk. Zwierzę. Zwierzę. Tygrys i lew. Je chleb. Ryba je chleb. Ryba je chleb. Słoń. Słoń. Koń je chleb. Koń je chleb. Krat pije wodę. Tygrys. Kot i ryba.
All right. So we'll go ahead and get started. Marilyn, how you doing? Oh, Marilyn left. Never mind. There she is. It got to 105. I came back and you were gone. I thought you gave up on me.
No, it just closed for some reason.
Gotcha. You doing all right?
Yeah, how are you?
I'm doing okay. Let's see. Let me check something real quick. Have you had a chance to look over the last set of notes for Unit 7?
I wrote them down a while ago, so I'm not sure.
Okay. Trying to think. So basically, these are the last set of notes that we've got for the course. If there's anything that comes up that doesn't make sense or you want to talk about, you can interrupt me. That's fine. Basically, the first set of notes deal with Grant and how he did as president. You remember why a lot of people wanted Grant to be president in the first place?
No, I don't remember.
You remember what Grant did in Unit 6? Or who he was in Unit 6?
Wasn't he a war hero?
He was. So that's the big reason he's elected president. So he's elected president in 68. He takes over after Andrew Johnson leaves. But he is not ready to deal with the politics of Washington. He was never elected to Congress in his life. He was never a governor of a state or any elected office. So he does not deal with the graft very well. Were you here last week for our?
Yeah.
Okay. So you remember the problem with Reconstruction? One of the big problems was you would have people who would go down to the South and promise to help, and they either would take the money and run, or they would overcharge and keep the difference. You know, that was the big problem with Reconstruction. And for a lot of people up north, also they didn't like the fact that they were paying for this through their taxes, and so you have several Republicans agree with the Democrats that this graft was ruining America. And so some of these Republicans break off and form their own party, and they call themselves liberal Republicans because liberals like change. They're trying to change the party. The Democrats and the liberal Republicans pick the same guy by the name of Horace Greeley, and he is a pretty weird looking dude. So I'll show you what he looks like real quick. There he goes. So, there he is. So, I don't know what's up with growing hair on your neck and shaving your face. That kind of defeats the whole purpose, but that's Horace Greeley. He lost to Grant because he still had, the big war hero kind of thing. And his scandals won't blow up until his second term, which interestingly enough happens to a lot of presidents if you study them. So Grant's reelected, but this guy Greeley kind of made history in a bad way. Right at the time of the election, he died. And he is the only presidential candidate to die during the election. And so half of the electors didn't know what to do with his votes. Half of them, did all kinds of crazy stuff. And the other half of them just said, well, he's on the ballot. I guess we got to vote for a dead guy. And so it's kind of weird. But when Grant takes his second term in 72, 73, he's got two big scandals that kind of ruin his reputation as an effective leader, as an effective president. And I'm going to show you a couple of them. Yeah, this isn't the one I want, the one where he's lost in the barrel. Let's see. Yeah, there it is. And this is Grant in the barrel looking for the guys who did all the trouble. And he's like lost because he's overwhelmed. That's kind of the reputation Grant's going to get. His Secretary of War had to resign after he was caught taking bribes. This kind of feeds into the graft thing, you know, our tax money is being wasted on Reconstruction. His personal secretary and other people took money also, but they were not punished. So this kind of gets the gossip going that Grant is not effective. Grant's not in control of his own White House. The other problem he's got, let's see, I noticed, and since you're the only, well, let me see. Yeah, you did the Panic of 1873. That's good. So you saw how like the economy was going down. That's the Panic of 1873. Grant's the president. The economy drops for 3 straight years. And it makes Grant look bad also because this is back in the day when the government didn't get involved in the economy. In fact, the government didn't get involved in any economic stuff really until the 20th century. But if things suck, you're going to blame the president. That hasn't changed no matter who the president is. And so this is another reason people going into the next election are saying, man, Grant can't hack it. You know, we don't need a guy like him around. And Grant was actually thinking of running for a 3rd term because there is nothing legally that's stopping him. Grant is one of the only presidents to think about running for a 3rd term. And what I'm trying to show you, and I'm not doing a good job in doing it, is this is Grant trying to do like a trapeze act where he's trying to get a 3rd term in office, but the stuff he's holding in his mouth, that is all pulling him down and making it impossible. So Grant thought about wanting to run for a 3rd term, but the Republicans are like, no, you suck. You need to go away. And so Grant leaves in 76. While all this is going on, the Democrats are becoming more and more popular in the South. Remember, we had talked about the Redeemer Democrats, the people who said, hey, we got to get these, you know, quote, black Republicans out of here because that's what they consider the Republican Party to be in the South. They thought it to be a puppet of African Americans. And so they said, let's get the Republicans out. Let's vote Democrats back into power. And some of them are like openly hostile and racist, you know, Klan members and people who like Klan members. The rest of them aren't openly hostile. They just don't care. You know, they're like, hey, if they're discriminating, I don't care. And so those are your redeemers. And by the time you get to 1876, there are only 3 states left that have not yet been, quote, redeemed, that are still under Republican control. And that's Florida, South Carolina, and Louisiana. Question. Do you know why 1876 is a big year in our notes today? Any guesses?
Was it like an election year?
It was. And it is the election, that is going to signal the end of Reconstruction. If I can get this map to work. Yeah, well, yeah, I can use that now. So this is the 1876 election. And can you kind of see the country is pretty evenly split?
Yeah.
Okay. In fact, the way this map shows it, it shows the red, which stands for what party on maps like this?
Republicans.
Right. In this map, the Republicans win the Electoral College and therefore the White House by 1 vote. But in fact, it was a very complicated election. The Republicans are running Rutherford B. Hayes, who is not a radical. He's more into economic issues and making America wealthy. And Samuel Tilden is the Democrat. And who has joined our party today? Natalie's joined our party today. So what happens is in 76, the Republicans say, yay, look, we won. But Tilden's like, no, y'all didn't win. In fact, you guys, you know, rigged this election because in Louisiana, Florida, and South Carolina, you still have Union troops in all three of those states. And the reason those troops are there is those states have very high populations of African Americans, and those troops are protecting African Americans' 15th Amendment right to vote. And so you had a large group of African Americans come out. They voted Republican, the party of Lincoln and the radicals and all that. And so Tilden's like, hey, we should have won those states because y'all rigged it with these soldiers, stuffing the ballot box with African American votes. And so neither side would accept the results. The Republicans wouldn't accept what the Democrats said, vice versa. And so they came up with this weird thing that had never existed before. It's not in the Constitution, but both sides agreed to use this thing that they came up with called an electoral commission. It would have 15 men on it. They would investigate all the claims and all of the, facts and all that, and they would try to figure out who should get those disputed votes, because those added together would give either one side the presidency or the other. And literally 2 days before the oath of office, they decided that all three of those states would go to Hayes. So that's what the Republicans got out of the deal. Now, you think the Democrats would be all pissed off, and they kind of were. So to keep them from getting too pissed off, and maybe you notice where most of the blue is at on this map? That's a question.
South.
Yes. And so another thing they're worried about is the South might get all butthurt again at the North and say, oh, look at these Yankees pushing us around. And you might start leading toward a second civil war right after the big one, and nobody wanted that. So what this Electoral Commission decided is, well, if we're going to give the Republicans the White House, we got to give the Democrats something. And that something was that all of the federal troops that were still down south would leave the South. They would go home. And if the troops leave the South and go home, who is going to protect the rights of African Americans?
Nobody.
Exactly. And so this is going to be the end of Reconstruction. If states want to discriminate from that point, they can. Nobody's going to stop them anymore. And that's meant to go on forever. In fact, it went on for 80 to 90 years. It's not until the 1950s and 60s anybody started going to the feds and said, hey, this is wrong. But how long do you get to be president for any one term?
4 years.
Right. So who gets the better end of the deal? The Republicans, who get to sit in the White House for 4 years, or the South, who gets what they want for what they thought would be forever, but in reality almost a century by the time it's over? All the people who were part of the deal are dead. So they got what they wanted for the rest of their lives. The Democrats got the better end of the deal. The South also got some other benefits of the deal. The federal government agreed to pay for the building of a lot more railroads in the South, which would help their economy. And there were a couple of redeemers that were picked to join President Hayes's cabinet. So now that Reconstruction's over, what's the South going to look like? You have these two pictures of the South. The South wants the picture to be the new South. We have changed because of all the railroads that are built. We're modern like the North is. They are also building iron and steel factories in the South, especially in and around Birmingham, Alabama. That's going to be nicknamed the Pittsburgh of the South, because Pittsburgh is the steel city. It's the football team. They're also going to build textile factories, especially in North Carolina. Like Lexington used to have a lot of textile factories until about 10, 20 years ago. They used to be up in New England, but now it's cheaper to make textiles down in the South and then transport them using the rail network. But that's just a show, the new South. Most of the South hasn't changed at all. This is the old South, the South that they don't want you to know about back in the day, where 94% of everybody, blacks and whites, are farming for a living. 94%, that is flipping huge. And African Americans are just like before the war, they don't have any power. They're not legally slaves anymore, but they have no power politically. And not just politically, but economically. Almost no African Americans could afford to buy land. The few who could afford it, a lot of places would restrict where they were allowed to buy land. So they were usually only allowed to buy land in places where it was unproductive. We got a telegraph going on in the back. But they would only let them buy crappy land that nobody else wanted. But for most, that wasn't even a thought. A few of the lucky ones, for most African Americans, the most they could ever hope for was to be a tenant farmer. And just like a tenant, like, if you live in an apartment, like I do, you're a tenant. And if you want to keep being a tenant, what do you have to do every so often to keep the landlord off your back?
Pay rent.
Exactly. And a tenant farmer is the same exact way. He's got to pay rent to stay on the farm. As long as he pays the rent, the landlord doesn't care what he does with the land. He can sit there and, pick his belly button all day. The owner doesn't care as long as he gets paid. In reality, the farmer can grow cotton, tobacco, apples, livestock, chickens, milk cows, whatever he wants. As long as he pays the rent, nobody cares. He can take time off. He can work as hard as he wants. He can hire people to work the land for him. Doesn't matter. But that is a dream for most African Americans. Most African Americans do not have cash to pay cash rent. So instead, what they do is what is known as sharecropping. And that is a situation where most of the time you go back to the person who was your master before the war and say, hey, look, I need something to do to provide for my family. What can I do? And, you're going to have Billy Bob or somebody say, well, that's okay. You were pretty good, back, picking cotton for me. Why don't you take this piece of land and you can pick the cotton on it? All right. So what you would do is he would pick that area of the farm. And then when the year was over, instead of paying cash, he would give the owner a piece of the crop, like 50% or whatever they agreed to. And the owner would sell that part of the crop and keep the cash, and that would be the rent payment. The problem is you're going to need tools and animals to work the land. You need animals to pull, the plows, and you need the plows themselves, and seeds and fertilizer, and just clothing and food and shelter. All of these things cost money. And so where are you going to get it? Well, the owner would give it to you on credit, and he would add that to your rent bill, and you would pay that with the crop. The problem would be what? Can you think of a problem with this whole system if you're the guy farming the land rather than owning it?
Wouldn't they only get paid like once a year?
Yes. And the other problem is if you are paying rent for living on the land and you have to borrow money from the owner and credit to get all of your farm tools and everything else you need in life, all of the cotton or whatever crop you sell, is that going to be enough cash to pay all of the debt to your landlord?
Oh, no.
No, you're still going to be in debt at the end of the year. And the problem is if you're in debt at the end of the year, guess what you have to do the next year?
Pay it off.
And if you can't, then what?
Try and work more.
Yep, that's exactly it. In other words, you're stuck on the land. You cannot leave the land. because you're in debt to the person that you are renting from, essentially. And if you try to leave, if you try to sneak off, then Billy Bob's going to go to his cousin, Bobby Jack. I'm running out of stereotypical redneck names. Then, he's going to swear out a warrant for your arrest. They still kind of do that today if you think about it. Like, back when there were still restaurants open you could go to. You go sit down at Applebee's or whatever, and you eat a bunch of food, and then the waiter or waitress says, "I'll go get you the check," and then you like run out the door and peel off. They can swear out a warrant for your arrest. Because you basically stole the food and didn't pay for it. Billy Bob's going to do the same thing back in Reconstruction. He's going to say, well, you stole my land and my tools and you didn't pay for them, and I'm going to swear out a warrant for your arrest. And so basically, these sharecroppers are stuck on the land, kind of like you had in slavery. The slaves were not allowed to leave, of course. You can't buy or sell the people, but they're stuck on the land. They have to do whatever they're told by the person who owns the land, because he's like, hey, if you're in debt to me, you're going to farm whatever I tell you to farm, or I'm going to call this. They're stuck. They have no control over their financial lives. And as the South is allowed to discriminate and segregate against African Americans, they're going to lose their right to vote. They're going to lose their right to go into town on days off and go to places they want to go and associate with people they want to associate with. I mean, the South is looking a lot like the old South, where whites are in one place and African Americans are in another, and the federal government just doesn't care anymore, which is really sad. Questions about this stuff so far?
So were the owners, they like weren't allowed to like hit the slaves or anything like they did back then?
I mean, they probably not legally, but the thing is like I said, nobody's there enforcing any of this stuff. So, they probably could if they wanted to. The problem is back in the day, while there was still legal slavery, they would usually hire an overseer to do all of the beating of the slaves. Now that there is no slavery, it wouldn't make financial sense to hire an overseer to do that stuff. So I'm really not totally sure how that would work, but I don't think you would really need to physically beat and whip them anymore. You would just pretty much run their life financially. The whole thing is with this system, both slavery and sharecropping, you don't have to pay the workers. See, this is the thing. The people who own the land are strapped for cash, especially after the war. They have all their money was tied up in the Confederacy. The Confederates lost the war, and the landowners don't have cash to pay people. And so this is part of what the sharecropping system was about. You would have the former slaves have some kind of job which they needed, and then the owners would have some kind of way to make cash again and try to go back to the way things used to be. That's a lot of how this whole sharecropping thing works. And they had sharecropping actually in some places all the way until the 1960s and 70s. The last school system I worked for, I had a superintendent. He was in his 60s or 70s, and in his office he had a twig that was from a cotton vine, and it was old and dried up. But he said he kept it there to remind him where he came from, because when he was a little boy in the summer times, he would go into the cotton fields and pick cotton with others who were sharecropping. So he actually knew what all that was like. I mean, it actually wasn't that long ago. Sharecropping went on for a long, long time. Anything else about those notes? Yes, no?
No.
Okay. So this is the last set of notes. This deals with the Homestead Act and the Transcontinental Railroad. Both of them got started during the Civil War. It's actually Lincoln's plan to tie America all together after the war is over. The Homestead Act dealt with the Great Plains. The part from Dances with Wolves where you saw the big, wide open country, flat as can be, most of it, very few trees, grass growing, the tall grass growing everywhere. Remember in Unit 4, we talked briefly about the fact that most white people saw this land as useless, as kind of a wasteland. They called it the Great American Desert. But technology is going to change a lot of that. They're going to come up with ways to break through the soil with steel plows. They're also going to come up with windmills where you can use the wind that's always blowing out in the west and attach drill bits to the windmill where you can drill down for water. It's very dry in the west, but you have water, trapped underground, but it's deep underground. It's like 100, 200 feet down. You got to drill, and then you can pull it up and use that to water the crops. Not hardly any trees. Do either of you two remember in Dances with Wolves when he first got to the fort and he was, like a lot of times he wouldn't leave his little barracks? Did you notice that the place he was staying at was built out of dirt and grass?
Mm.
Okay. That's sod. And basically, you cut out little bricks of that from the ground, you let it dry, and you can stack them up like bricks. So people didn't want to live out there. But the Homestead Act is going to encourage people to move out there. And what it says is if somebody moves out to the west and they see a piece of land and they want to farm it, all they got to do is register it with the feds. Then they got to build a house on it and farm it for 5 years. They put those strings on it because they didn't want wealthy people from New York or other places back east to move out there, say, oh, this is my land. I never lived on it, but technically it's mine. And then they'll flip it and sell it and make money. They didn't want it to be a way for wealthy people to make even more money. They wanted it to be a way for people who wanted a second chance at life and to start over and be independent and successful, a way to do that. So once you lived on the land for 5 years and farmed it, they would give you title to it. It would be signed by the president, even. That's before they had machines making the president's signature. I mean, this was like the president's real signature. People were very proud of it. But it would get 1.5 million Americans to move out west. And this is what's going to make America very wealthy. You're going to have meat and crops grown out there and sold all over the world. They're still grown or sold, I should say, all over the world. In fact, there's only one group of people that are not allowed to get this free land besides Native Americans. Can either of you two guess who is not allowed to get this free land?
Women.
Say that again.
Women.
Women were allowed to get it.
Oh.
Remember, we passed this law in the middle of the Civil War, so that's your clue.
African American.
Nope, they could get it too. It's the Civil War. Who were the bad guys?
The South.
Yep, they could not get it. In fact, African Americans, a lot of them wanted to do the Homestead Act because this would get them out of the South. Remember, the Homestead Act's for farmers. African Americans, a lot of them were farming on the plantation, so they knew the mechanics of how to farm and take care of crops. And so you had hundreds of thousands of African Americans move out to Kansas, Nebraska, the Dakotas, and go out and farm out there. In fact, you have a group of cowboys in Texas called the Exodusters, who were African American cowboys. There's a mural of all of this in East Greensboro along Cone Boulevard. There's a shopping center where they painted this really big mural of African Americans farming and cowboying and all this stuff out in the West. It's pretty neat. Let me check something real quick. Maybe I can get lucky with this today. I don't think so. Yeah, there it is. Oh, good. I did get lucky today. There it is. Y'all see it?
Yeah.
Yeah. There were cowboys going out west and doing all this stuff. Not only were African Americans treated with respect, but women, going back to what you said, they were treated with respect. It is so difficult to live on the plains. Like this time of year, this is when all the tornadoes and the hailstorms hit the Great Plains. And then in the winter, they get blizzards. And then in the summer, you could go without rain for 3 months and it's 110 degrees. And you got insects who will come out of nowhere in giant swarms and eat up your crops. And you got dust storms that'll come down from the Rocky Mountains and bury your crops up to your hip and suffocate all the crops and kill half your livestock. And so it's very difficult to live out in the Great Plains. And so anyone who could make it was deemed worthy of respect. And, this is why this is like the first part of America that really had, anything close to equality back in the day. The West is going to be the first part of the country that's going to allow women the right to vote, for example. So this is kind of a big deal. The last part of the notes deals with the Pacific Railway Act. If we're going to get people to move out west, we need some kind of transportation network to move crops, livestock, and people and other resources around the West. And so Lincoln says, hey, let's not have one railroad go across. Let's actually have 2 railroads go across. And let me check something real quick because I don't think you guys have. No. Your warm-up today is about the Transcontinental Railroad. And one of the things that it has on there is the fact that you have not one railroad being built, but 2 railroads being built at the same time. Can any of you guys think of the advantages of that?
Double the transportation.
Well, it would double the speed of building the railroad. If you got one railroad going across, you're going like this. If you got 2 of them, you can go at double the speed and then meet in the middle and get it done a lot faster. But there is a photo that I put in your warm-up, which you guys haven't seen yet. So I'm giving you basically the answer for some of your warm-ups questions today, which is this is the meeting of the railroad. You had one railroad start getting built in Sacramento, California. You had some other smaller railroads, but none of them ever made it past Sacramento because the mountains were too high. So you start building over the mountains toward the east. The other railroad starts in Omaha, Nebraska. because that's where all the railroads from the east stopped. Anything past Omaha was considered that empty wasteland countryside that nobody thought was worth it. So you build toward the middle, and then you meet up in this ceremony here in Utah. And if you look in the middle, you see the guys shaking hands. Those are the owners of the two railroads meeting up. And then if you look behind them, you see they've got some champagne. It looks like they're about to toast. But if you look, I'm going to see if I can. Yeah, there you go. Oh, there's even a woman in this picture. Huh. Well, no, maybe that isn't. I don't know. I should stop. But racially, what do all these people have in common?
They're all white.
They are. But that is a lie. In fact, only one of the two railroads was built mainly by white people. That was the one coming out of Nebraska. You would have all of your immigrants go out to Omaha, and most of them Irish immigrants. They had 10,000 of these immigrants working all day, all night. They got paid $1 a day, which back then was a lot of money. But in California, you don't have Irish immigrants. You do have immigrants, but they're not from Ireland. Any guesses as to what part of the world they're from? They're not white people.
The South? Oh, they're from like another country?
Another part of the world, yes.
Africa?
Nope. Let me try this. No. Noticing you don't see a lot of Pacific Ocean maps. There we go. That works. All right. Y'all still seeing this?
Yeah.
Okay. So California is about here. All right. New York's over here. Your Irish immigrants are coming across the Atlantic Ocean because, makes sense. Europeans come across the Atlantic Ocean to the east coast of the United States. So who's coming to the west coast of the United States?
Asia?
Yes. And what country in particular? Take a guess.
China?
Yes, that is exactly it. So while the railroad's being built, you have many tens of thousands, maybe over 100,000 Chinese coming across the Pacific, landing in California, needing a job, just like the Irish need jobs in the East, the Chinese need jobs in the West. And they're like, hey, we need a railroad built. How about you help us build it? So just like the Irish are building the railroad in the East, the Chinese are doing the really hard work because they're building railroads over mountains, digging tunnels through mountains, all kinds of crazy stuff to build the railroad in the western extreme part of the country. And you notice they're nowhere in the picture. In fact, they were just off of the shot, and they were told, do not get in the shot. You're not allowed to be in the shot. But they built half of the railroad, which is pretty sad and messed up. So once the railroad's built, you've got this entire network of railroads that is able to crisscross the country, get people in and out of there. Now, if you want to move out west, you don't have to take a horse and buggy or go on horseback. You can just go by railroad. You can move farm equipment into the farmers who need it. You can send crops and livestock out from the farms once they sell it. You're going to have railroads also be able to go into the mountains and mine gold, silver, and other resources out of those mountains and make money that way. It's a big deal, and now you can go from New York on the East Coast all the way to San Francisco on the West Coast, and instead of taking a year, it takes 1 week. And you know what's funny is it's the year 2020, and it still takes 1 week. Kind of sad, but that's kind of how it is. Questions about any of this stuff?
Nope.
Okay. Well, that is it for the notes, not just for today, but for good. Do any of you guys have questions about anything? It can be not related to notes, it can be about grades or anything at all.
What's the last day we can turn in stuff?
I want to say May 15th. I'm not totally sure about that date. I was just sent an email today about changing grades if I wanted to. They didn't put a deadline on that, but if you're missing anything, the sooner you do it, probably the better off it's going to be. One thing I wanted to remind you two about since you're here is there are no new Canvas assignments for either of y'all, but both of y'all still have assignments you can turn in for me for quarter 4. And also, since today's the last day of notes for Unit 1, if we were in the classroom today would have been the last day also. But the 45 questions for Unit 7 are due on Tuesday of next week. So if you can come up with those and send them in to me, that would help you out also. And that's pretty much it. Anthony emailed 20 minutes ago and said he's trying to join and it won't let him. It's weird. You two got in okay, right?
Yeah.
I wonder if you used the 9 o'clock link. Oh well. But yeah, if you have any questions about anything and you want to ask individually, I'll have tutoring hours or service hours or whatever you want to call them, both Tuesday and Thursday of next week. Also, we will have a class next Friday at 9 and 1, but it shouldn't last very long since we're done with the notes. Marilyn, I'm looking at the Beta Club database. I saw you turned in your hours. I've got them recorded. Natalie, if you've got them, I need them ASAP so I can fill that in and put you down and not have to worry about it. That's pretty much all I got, unless you guys have anything else you needed me to go over.
Nope.
All right, then I will see you guys later, and y'all have a good weekend.
You too.
All right, thank you guys.
Yep.
Bye.